Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Stories. What's your best "I've messed with the wrong person" moment? Episode 4. This happened when I was 16. My mom worked for a concert hall helping to arrange events there, and one particular night at an event she was incredibly stressed out from being late to work that night and fighting off a cold. She was ready to just set up for the event and get home. I went with her that evening to help move chairs onto and off the stage for an orchestra/choir group that was using the building. My mom and I were just finishing the last bit of the setup as the orchestra was warming up, and some smug guy from the choir finds it necessary to harass my mom. This guy was somewhere in his 40s, 6 feet 4 inches, and must have been 260 plus. He starts asking my mom why she's going so slow and following her around and just being an overall person. I finished my task and came to help my mom stack some chairs before we left when I noticed this guy bothering her. She looked on the verge of tears, ready to leave, and exhausted. I told the guy to get away and leave us alone to finish. His response was, "Respect your elders, kid." He turned to walk away, and in doing so, purposefully bumped into my mother. At that point, I was sick of this guy. I took it upon 16-year-old, 5 feet 10 inches 180-pound me to end this. I reached up to the guy's shoulder, turned him around, and landed the most satisfying punch to his face. The guy crumpled to the floor and my mom burst into tears. He stood up, shocked, and my mom and I left. Turns out he was the director/maestro and had to direct while his face swelled up and a black eye formed. I got my car taken away for about a month, but it was worth it.
Mine is about my husband. I had my rat tie, very social, very friendly, very well disciplined, at a park under my gazebo at a New Year's a couple of years ago. A drunk girl came past and didn't see him and nearly tripped over him. Wally didn't care, but she saw he was a Rottweiler and started screaming in his face that she was being attacked. My dog looked confused as hell. He wasn't even moving. People around were laughing at the sight. Her equally drunk boyfriend came over to me while I was holding my 1-year-old and started yelling at me and threatening to hit me. What he didn't realize was that 2 foot behind me in a low camp chair was my 6 feet 7 inches, 265 pounds husband. The man got quite the fright when he unfolded himself from the chair, asked, "Do you have a problem with my dog or wife?" while untying Walter. Now the guy might have been crazy enough to threaten a 5 feet 4 inches woman with a rat tie, but he wasn't insane enough to challenge a giant with a rat tie. He picked up his still writhing drunk girlfriend and ran. Being big is my husband's only card. He has never actually had to fight anyone though, because most people see a man of his proportions and just back up.
My ex-GF. I came home drunk that night. I had driven her car home as mine wasn't running well. Definitely shouldn't have driven, shouldn't have stayed out as late as I did, shouldn't have drunk as much as I did. On top of it, as a younger man, you couldn't tell me what to do. So that's how the argument went. I went into the kitchen and turned around and she had me blocked into the corner. We were having this argument about whether I wanted it or not. I told her to go away, she didn't, tried to walk out of the kitchen, she blocked my way. It escalated, and I called her a fat lady. Shouldn't have said it, it was very mean. She always had an issue with her image. She wasn't fat at all, absolutely gorgeous, but I said it knowing it would cut deep and hoping that she would walk away in tears and kill the argument till we had both cooled down. I'm quite ashamed of it now, but it had worked on prior occasions. This time I was wrong. She grabbed a steak knife and went right at me with it. This is the one and only time I put hands on a woman, completely in self-defense, but it was entirely and completely my fault it happened. I'm twice the size of her and used it to my advantage, stepped into her thrust with the knife while wheeling the knife away with my right and open hand slapped her with my left. She still cut me fairly good. She came right back at me or tried to. At this point she was against the wall, and I bear hugged her and lifted her up. She buried her heel right in my balls, causing me to go down as well, but I still held tight. She finally gave up and broke down and apologized. I, still drunk, got in her car, and left. Slept in the back seat in a nearby parking lot. I don't drink so much anymore and have slowed my temper down and shown everyone the respect they deserve. At least try to. We broke up shortly after that, mutually. I gave her credit though, didn't think she had it in her. I just pushed her too far. Had my back been turned, I'd potentially be dead. Tough girl, I wouldn't see her again. TLDR, came home drunk and fought with ex-GF. She came at me with a knife extremely hard and threw me a fairly good beating. If you're a male in a family full of males, the older male will always beat out of you. It doesn't matter what kind of shape you all are in. Right after I graduated high school, I was in the best shape of my life. I was shredded from top to bottom, note the was. I had the stamina of several gazelles and the ego of someone who would compare himself to several gazelles. I had recently lost my virginity, graduated high school, and bought a car with money I had saved up from my few jobs. As far as I was concerned, I was downright legendary. I sat atop the world in a golden throne, ready to conquer the rest of my life with an iron fist. The first obstacle was my dad. My dad used to bodybuild and he works with his hands all day every day. He has forearms that could snap the neck of a gorilla. I have watched him throw a refrigerator, and despite this, in my youth, I would challenge him to wrestling matches for glory. He won every single time. He was bigger, smarter, and stronger than I was. No matter my advantage, he kicked my ass soundly. Well, a few nights after graduation, I was feeling particularly strongly. We had had a few beers in front of the TV and the subject of physical strength came up. At this point, I had not challenged my old man for quite some time out of a combination of wisdom and cowardice. That night it would change. I stood and slammed my beer down. He knew and began to roll his sleeves. I tackled him and we tussled for what was probably like 30 seconds before we both were on our feet again. He managed to lock my arms up from behind with his lobster claws, so I pushed him into the wall. He was squeezing vigorously, so I knew I had to act quickly. I reared back and smashed him into the wall once more. "Look," I yelled amidst the fray, "I'm about to break your ribs. If you don't let go and call uncle, I'm going to break your ribs." I smashed once more into a very satisfying pained groan. "Do it," he taunted. So, I did. I lowered down and threw all of my weight, all of my torque into his chest and into the wall behind him. I felt his ribs give and then felt at least one break. He groaned miserably and loosened his grip. I felt awful and turned around to apologize only to be tackled to the ground and thrown into some sort of pretzel lock that not even UFC Houdini could get out of. My shoulder was under some immense pressure and once again, his vice grips were firmly located on my wrists. The pressure built and built and built until I could actually feel my bones moving and failing before I yelled uncle. He got up, told me to get him another beer and took a seat. My then 55-year-old father beat me again with broken ribs. I was still but a child. I'm in my late 20s now. I will never challenge him again. He has no fear. He will have no destruction. Normally I'm Mr. Docile and struggle with conflict, suffering the serious butterflies in your stomach sensation and severe fear. However, on other behalf I've always been more upstanding and in this case it was my now wife. We both worked for a company that catered for bands backstage at festivals and 9 times out of 10 everyone we met was fantastic, friendly, and generally nice people. However, at Download Festival, a fairly big metal festival in the Midlands in the UK, my wife was accosted by a truly epic case. She had gone to manage another service bar and as the job prescribed she flirted and made nice with all of our customers. About 20 minutes later she returns in tears and terrified, telling me a man had grabbed her, banged her head repeatedly against the massive generator outside the back of the tent and told her not to be a tease. He subsequently confessed his name to be Beanie, showing a tattoo on the inside of his bottom lip reading Bean, and tried to meet her. Luckily another performer who was using the same backstage area interrupted him and she was able to run back to our van selling coffee about 800 yards across the VIP area. Now we had just started seeing each other and I had recently discovered I am slightly the jealous type, so seeing her flirtation, which admittedly I knew was a huge part of the job, I had been slowly getting annoyed. Obviously, though this was a whole other thing, I asked her who had attacked her, and she explained, while one of our colleagues looked after her. I made Emmy over to the tent. Now rage is not something I ever successfully aim at other people. Usually, my empathy overpowers, and I try to understand what has happened. Obviously that didn't happen. I made my way to the back of the tent and ran into two guys chatting, one clearly very drunk, the other very clearly humoring him. I sidled over and in joking semi-hushed tones asked if either of them knew Bean. The drunker of the two grinned and said, "I'm Bean, I've got in enough fights to have punched people before, but my raging anger and disgust lead me to do something I had never done before or since. I slapped him like no tomorrow." He recoiled and looked at me confusedly. I subsequently screamed in his face about how I knew what he had done and that he is the lowliest guy to walk the earth. The performer he was chatting with looked on, shocked to say the least, while I unloaded. Now in all of this intensity one don't remember much, but I do remember the look on his face when he realized that he had not only been caught but that it was not a small girl. My wife is 5'4" and 120 pounds while I, 6'3" and 250 pounds, with whom he could beat or scare into staying quiet. Twinned with slapping of him, which upon telling him I knew his crimes I did for the next 15 minutes, backing him into a corner by the hoarding and screaming in his face until he claimed he couldn't hear. Called a bouncer, man had his cheekbone broken and got thrown out. When I was in middle school I had to walk quite a while, a bit over a mile seemed quite the distance back then, to my bus stop. There were two boys at my bus stop. One was in 8th grade and the other mine, 6th. The 6th grader was a dick but all talk. The 8th grader was snarky and downright violent at times. He was smart and looked nice though, so he never got in trouble. I played the French horn that year. One day I bent over to tie my shoes, and he decided that was the day he was going to start walking me home in a headlock. We lived less than 2 blocks away, so it was about a mile a day in a headlock. It sucked. One day he stopped and told me to wait as he bent over to tie his own shoe. Coincidence? I had my French horn in its hard-ass case. I swung around in a circle once or twice and cracked him on the side of the head. I left him there with a pool of blood thinking I had killed him. I ran home and told my mom I killed him and the rest of the story. She told me to wait till tomorrow to see if anything came of it. When I was older I asked her why she didn't do something then, and apparently she didn't think I was big enough to seriously hurt him. He came to school sometime the next week with a patch over his eye and bandages over half of his head. He said he fell down the stairs. Subway in New York. Train stops. A huge hulking businessperson in nice suit gets angry that someone won't get out of his way. Has standoff. But the other guy is another huge hulking business guy in a nice suit. First guy throws himself into a grapple with the second guy. They're each using their bulk because for each of them that had always been the game-winning move. The subway car clears out in a hurry as these titans scramble around the car. And then there's a heavy breathing pause as these two huge guys, still caught in a violent embrace, realize that they're evenly matched for probably the first time in their lives. They push apart and silently go their separate ways. I was a little tough to manage in my teen years. Puberty hit, I got all full of anti-anything resembling authority, and my mom couldn't handle it, got in trouble for shoplifting and was sneaking out nearly every night. Mom made a comment one day about sending me to military school or having my father deal with me. A few weeks later my dad picked me up from school. He stayed with us for a week. Sleeping in the living room, so I couldn't sneak out. He'd locked my window down from the outside so I couldn't get out that way. Every day that week after school he was there, checking my homework, making sure my chores were done. That whole week riding my ass like he's been a parent the whole time. I was angry and I wanted to beat him senselessly, was a bundle of rage, hormones, and just used to getting what I wanted. I was done with this stuff. Saturday I woke up and it was just him and me. I got ready to bounce and go hook up with some friends from my old neighborhood, maybe stay gone all weekend. According to him that wasn't happening. I tried to push past to the door, no go. He made me an offer. I'd been wrestling and doing fairly good, undefeated in school-to-school meets. He says if I can pin him I can bounce. I was 100% confident I was going to break this man in half. Coach stopped wrestling with me because I threw his back out in practice. This little man was mine. For the next 5 minutes I was schooled. I leaned almost immediately that my father had been a wrestler in high school based on how he moved. I never really had control in any move I pulled, and I truly feel sorry for the downstairs neighbor, but he was an old school Mac and probably figured I was getting a much needed ass kicking. Every hold he escaped, every grapple he revered, every throw he stopped. I started getting dirty, quick punches, illegal holds, grips meant to burn. They either didn't faze him or again he countered. We'd been going at it for a while when I realized almost this entire time he had wrist control. He wasn't really using it, but he always at any time could have put me in a hold. I was so focused on my own moves I hadn't noticed, and when I did it was like he'd slapped me. I fully realized I was in over my head at this point, but testosterone and anger told me to go harder. I broke his wrist control and started outright swinging. I'd like to say I got a few good shots in. All made contact. I have no idea if there was any real effect. What I do know was on the 5th or 6th swing I was completely wrapped up, on my knees and in an unbreakable choke, and passed out shortly thereafter. When I woke up, I was on the couch, towel on my head, Dad over me, and he said, "Whatever you do, you need to realize there is going to be someone bigger and stronger than you." I can't say I walked the straight and narrow after that, but I can say I did pay closer attention and stopped acting like I was the biggest man in the room. I was more manageable for a while as well. I used to have a friend, and he was an okay guy. Then one day, he decided to be a man about everything. From the music I listened to, the way I dress, and all that. I told him politely to just stop, and that the whole thing was uncalled for. He kept going on and on and on. Well, later that week, I got my revenge. I had his login for Xbox, Skype, Tumblr, and his phone number. On his Tumblr I posted that he was proud to finally come out as a bisexual furry, and wrote a whole 2-page confession. Because he had the same password for everything, I was able to change his Skype password so when people messaged him about being a furry, I could reply and confirm it. Also, I have a friend who knows how to hack on Xbox. Had an akimbo and wall hack installed, played on his account until eventually he was banned. As one last measure I posted his number on a hooker ad on Craigslist saying he was a hooker called Sasha Diamond. I then dropped all contact with him. In middle school I was a small kid, still am. Most everybody in my school knew me as the funny, sarcastic kid. However, there was a new kid in school. Chewy is what we called him. He was expelled from his old school and spent time in juvie. Being awkward little me, I saw him in an empty hallway and said something to him. I don't remember what, but apparently it offended him. He started yelling and he got up and ran after me. I had no idea what was going on, so I just turned the corner to my woodshop class, and he followed me. Let's be clear here. 90-pound me, maybe about 4 feet, and maybe 180-pound 5 feet 6 inches him. He slammed me around the wooden tables a bit, then left because the teacher would have gotten there any minute. The people that watched it all go down were just as confused as I was. It was only later that I figured out that he was easily offended, and I must have said something to offend him. Would have been good for me to know. My old flat mate was really into karate, but this isn't about her as much as it is her instructor, who was out in town at his bachelor party with his other black belt friends. They're all in their mid-30s and hardly look like they are under 18, legal age for drinking here. They decide to go into this pub for whatever reason and it's got a bouncer. The bouncer informs them that they will need ID to get in, which has them a bit baffled. Everywhere else they'd been they hadn't been checked and they don't look under 25. They tell the bouncer to get serious and they're in their 30s, it's obvious, no one will complain they didn't get checked. The bouncer apparently had enough stuff that night and just fired a punch at the karate instructor. Well, not only did the punch not land, but the bouncer did, flat on his back. As it turns out, trying to punch 3 black belts is far from a great idea. The bar manager calls the police officers claiming it was an unprovoked attack on the bouncer. No one in the queue backed the claim, most saying it was the other way. Flat mate's friend gets asked if he wants to press charges. They decide against and call it a night. Before I tell you this, I need you to know that I'm generally a nice person. I am not a troublemaker. I was never in a fight before. I can't even remember when I verbally assaulted anyone the last time. Even when I'm drunk I'm nice as hell to everyone around me. But there was this one time when I was a huge drunk, and I honestly still don't know why. I went to a concert with me and my friends and of course we got drunk before entering. Well, I got a bit too drunk. I got so wasted that I could hardly stand or speak. I'm not usually like that. So, we got to the entrance where I'm supposed to show my ticket. The guy asks for the ticket, and I show it to him. He tries to rip it apart, like he's supposed to, and I for some reason got mad at him for doing that. He then says, "ID please," and I simply say, "Nope." He asks again and yet again I say, "No." He somehow gets me to show him the ID and he then tries to quickly touch my pockets and sleeves to see if I'm trying to smuggle any drinks inside. The drunk me of course didn't want him to touch me. I don't remember this part very well as it all happened so fast, and I was drunk, but I know I tried to bypass the body check even though I wasn't smuggling anything, so I just started walking inside. I remember him grabbing me and pulling me outside and I again tried to go inside. All I remember then is him saying something along the lines, "Dude, don't do this," as he's walking towards me and pushing me away with his arm. I snapped out of it at that moment, sobered up and sincerely apologized. Told him I'm sorry for being drunk and let him check me. He then let me inside. It would suck to be in my first fight and of course lose it when I was drunk. This is a story about my younger brother, definitely a guy you shouldn't mess with, although at the time you'd never know it by looking at him. He was a chubby little kid that was as nice as could be. I was in 5th grade and Lou, my brother, was in 3rd grade. We rode the bus home from school every day and would be dropped off with a bunch of other kids about a half-mile from our house and would walk from there. Somehow Lou had offended Josh, one of the neighborhood kids that rode our bus. Josh was one of those guys you really didn't want to mess with. He came from a rough family and gave off a real dangerous white trash vibe. Josh wanted to kick the crap out of Lou and set up for them to fight to settle their dispute one day after we got off the bus. There was a whole group of kids who got off at our stop to see Lou get the crap kicked out of him. So, we get to the spot where I'm about to watch my brother get pounded on and a couple of guys tell me if I help him they'll jump me, so, to my shame, I settle in to watch the fight. Lou and Josh are standing opposite each other and Lou is following the advice my dad has always given us, do everything you can to avoid a fight. And tells Josh that he isn't going to fight him. My brother turns his back on Josh and starts to walk away towards our house. When Josh starts running at my brother, closing the distance quickly and jumping kicks him square in the back. Lou has just been blindsided by this little thug and falls to his knees in pain. It's at this moment when the other part of my dad's advice rings in my brother's head. Do everything you can to avoid a fight. But if you have to fight, win. Josh is standing behind my brother taunting him, and in one swift movement Lou pivots from his knees, carried by the momentum of rocketing to his feet, and hits Josh in the bottom of his nose with the heel of his palm. It's like it happened in slow motion. There was a sickening thud and simultaneous explosion of blood and pain from Josh as Lou is now on his feet and Josh is falling to the ground with his face covered in blood. It was shocking. Everyone is watching in awe because nobody expected this outcome. The fight is definitely over and I'm honestly surprised Josh is alive. I ran up to Lou and told him to run home because this was over, and it would be bad if any of these kids decided they wanted revenge on my brother. So, Lou takes off running towards home. It's at this moment an older woman comes running out of her house seeing a kid laying on the ground bleeding profusely from his face. She asked what happened and I told her that he'd fallen and hit his nose on a rock. Fifth graders are such great liars. Josh ended up having a broken nose and there was no permanent damage, but from that day forward he was nothing but nice to my little brother. Went with about 4 friends to a large party and quickly realized we were out of place/younger than everyone else there. After a few minutes being there I see some guy who sold me and my friends bad drugs and go straight up to him. I started talking and then after the argument gets very heated he decides to add, "This is my house and my party." My tone immediately changed as I only had a few friends with me and he as a whole party circled around me. I tried to leave, got circled outside. For the first/only time in my life I got my ass kicked and all I could do was sit there and take it, considering if I actually got any good swings off on him 10 guys would jump me. So, I took the beating then left. In high school we had a pretty annoying guy hang out with us from time to time who I'll call Himantopus. We're sitting at our spot and Himantopus decides to start throwing small rocks at me. I tell him to stop so he does but then starts throwing them at my friend Harold. This is how I found out Harold has a short temper. Himantopus starts laughing and continues to throw rocks. Harold gets up proceeds to give him an ass kicking he'll never forget. Each punch connects with the face, I've never seen anything like it. Himantopus is on the ground, Harold kicks him a few times and walks away. 20 minutes later Harold and I are getting our books for the next period, his locker is next to mine. Himantopus shows up, puts his hands around Harold's neck and says if he doesn't that again he'll kick his ass. Himantopus then receives another beating. I'm not saying what Harold did was right by any means, but he did warn him. I worked with a guy who went to Wales with his friends on a holiday. One day they went to the pub and this man, quite unassuming, takes offense to my colleague's friend. It literally descends into the guy asking if his mate if he wanted to take it outside. My colleague's friend fancied the odds, so said okay. They get outside, and the older man knocks my colleague's friend out with one punch. Turns out the random Welsh man used to be Joe Calzaga's sparring partner. I've got 2 from working at a Renaissance fair. The serious story. 2 15-ish-year-old guys are running around site just causing trouble and filming it. They are messing with performers, heckling the stage acts, and disturbed our housekeepers of honor's tea party. These girls range from 5 to 13-ish years old and are just adorable and innocent. The last straw was they started messing with our fairies. They pick in Autumn. She's petite and maybe around 5 feet 4 inches. One man grabs her from behind. Little did this guy know our Autumn is a black belt in her late 20s. She disarms him and holds him until security picks him up. Security guys yell at this kid for an hour, he's in tears, and take him to the edges of the property where he has to wait for his parents. The silly story. My favorite story of Will. Willie drinks more and yes he will. Older guy and a total goofball. He was walking around a city, not as a performer, just a guy going about his life, and this guy tried to pick a fight with him. Will says, "I've studied martial arts, and you don't know what you are getting into. First, I'm going to hurt your hand with my face. If that doesn't scare you off, I'll probably start to bleed." Then, if you keep bothering me, I'm going to start bleeding all over you. He had the guy laughing, and I don't think a punch was thrown. Okay, this is told by my father. He spent 28 years in the Navy. The United States had trade restriction placed on Iraq. My father's job was to oversee seized ships. They had stopped this large Russian cargo ship that had broken the restriction. My father's order was to lead the seizure group. My father watched as the Russians got really angry after 3 days of being held. The Russians had started carrying wrenches, and my father went to talk to the captain of the Russians. The captain is defensive, saying, "I want cigarettes and bourbon for my crew. Then I will tell them to stand down." My father says, "Oh, you're threatening a maniac." My father orders his destroyer's gun to be pointed in his direction. "Ready rounds, and don't miss on my mark." The 10-inch gun is about 50 yards away, and they are staring down the barrel. The Russian captain's face goes white. He then tells his men to get back in the racks and to refrain from carrying weapons.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.